I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies.
Welcome to Cookies, the postseason basketball podcast. Jordan Redaelli is on vacation.
The off-season basketball podcast.
Off-season. It is postseason, though, technically.
Oh, like as in post-season.
And we're
My bad.
also the preseason
The preseason basketball podcast.
Not sure where Jordan is. He's on his summer break.
His fifth Mai Tai.
I got a ping on a sat phone that he's on a locomotive headed from the Black Forest to deepest Transylvania. Something on the transom about spatchcocking a brown bear with
Ooh, that's a dark
lingonberries,
image, man.
local dill.
He picked the dill himself.
So, yeah, hopefully he gets the R&R that he richly deserves and will be back with us next week. But who can say?
I mean, we overwork our talented people. Basketball players shouldn't be playing as much in the summer as we think, and Jordo shouldn't be dropping his takes as much. He's got to save it up for the fall.
It is the postseason, after all.
It is.
And the preseason. I feel like the guy just OD'd on gruel. He had a little too much gruel. And
He got into the gruel stash?
That's what the interns told me, that when we weren't around, Jordan was dipping into the gruel.
Wow. The interns, meanwhile, are selling Jordan out. They're D'Angelo Russelling Jordo.
Little prison snitches, all of them. They've been great on Twitter, though. Shout to the interns.
Yeah, I mean, feeding them less gruel has provided good results for us on Twitter.
It's always been our policy, and I don't see any reason that it should change.
No.
How are you dealing with this heat wave, if we're going to talk about the weather?
It's balmy out there, man. It is wildly... New York City subways are a trip in July and August. Like rats running around, people sweating through their clothes, steam, and everyone just thinks it's normal.
What's this deal with these, like, rushing torrents of sewage? Is that going to be... Is that the new normal?
Right, like there was a video that went up. Let's talk about the new normal.
Is that
rushing currents of sewage.
Is that what we do now?
Are we doing this? Yeah, there was that video. Ben's talking about this video that kind of went viral, maybe just in New York, of just like this brown water pouring into a subway car, and another video of the same brown water like pouring out of a wall and like toppling a metro a subway worker.
We do that now. That's the new normal.
That's the new normal. Well,
If you get on the subway, you should anticipate a cresting waterfall of sewage. And once you accept that this is now how we get around, sort of surfing through the tide of feces in the New York City subway, then what's the big deal?
one time I was waiting for, I forget which train, but I think it was Union Square, and somebody a few, like 20 feet on street level was taking a piss on a grate, and it was just like cascading down onto the platform. And as true New Yorkers, everyone's like, "Oh my God, get out of the way!" Everyone like, "Do not! That's pee." And everyone was kind of like, "Good looking out, thank you." But no one was actually just like, "This is no way to live." You know, everyone's just like, "That was a close call. That would have ruined my day."
No one stopped the urinator. It was more like, well, he's going to pee no matter what.
There was no way to get to the urinator. We had already paid our $2.75, and he was urinating from street level.
Oh,
man.
so just a faceless, anonymous urinator, and everyone else just dealt with the ramifications of that.
As we were waiting for our train.
A victimless crime.
Yeah, and it seemed totally normal until I thought about it, and I was like, that was not that normal.
It's the new normal.
Shower of urine.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen anyone pee on the train itself in a long time. Every now and then you'll get on the train and you'll smell it, but it's hard to know if that's wafting from
It's always
a
pee.
person or someone actually peed on the train itself. It can really go either way.
A lot of subways in Asia are really nice, and you're not even allowed to drink liquids. Like one time, I was waiting for a subway, and I took a water bottle out of my bag, and the conductor standing on the platform was like, "Oh, please, sir, like no beverages allowed." It's crazy, and it runs on time. It's clean. New York is awesome for many reasons, but the subway's not one of them.
Do you remember that subway shaming site from a few years ago? I think it was called like Subway Pigs or something along those lines, and they would take photos of people eating on the train.
Oh, that was mean. I
It was
remember
mean,
that.
and it felt very classist.
Yeah, I eat on the subway sometimes. Like, I'll eat a candy bar. I'll buy like a $6 Crunch bar to fund some guy's youth league team, and I'll just eat it.
I think the most lavish meal that I've ever eaten on the train was probably a slice of pizza, which in retrospect
for sure.
it's gross.
It's
Don't get
gross,
me wrong.
but yeah.
Like being on the subway with like a folded slice of pizza in your other hand is technically gross. I also think anyone eating on the subway is pretty gross. Candy bar, fine. Coffee, bag of peanut M&Ms, which are the most delicious thing ever made.
The hardest candy, we figured that out on cookies.
They're hard as shit. You put
Yeah.
that on a leather jacket, it's good to go.
Don't fuck with that guy.
Do not fuck with him.
If he walks onto the subway, do not talk to the guy with the leather M&M's jacket.
Especially if he's eating a handful of leather
Peanutception.
M&Ms. Are those leather flavored?
Hardception.
But yes, it was classist because a lot of the people who were eating seemed to be people perhaps going between jobs or rushing home to get their kids. And this is probably not their preferred choice as to how they were going to inhale sustenance. Like, I doubt many people, if given the opportunity to eat in a restaurant or at home or in a cafeteria, would say, actually, I'm more of a train diner. It's not a dining car like we're riding on Amtrak.
Right, like the ambiance matters. A few weeks ago, I was riding the JMZ train, and some guy in a really kind of nice suit was like causing up a ruckus. So I just like stayed away from him. He comes down the aisle and sits right next to me, eating a box of Popeye's chicken. He's like talking shit to everybody. He's wiping his hands on. He's just like, what? To everybody. Eye contact. He's like, anyone want to fight? One of those guys, right? Having an awful day. And I was just looking at my phone. He puts the box of chicken down, like kind of like near my lap, like near us. And he looks at me and he goes, did you just spit in my food? And I, like a moron, I say, why would I ever spit in that food? It's delicious. And it like confused him so much. He was like, "Oh, are you trying to fight?" I'm like, "No, it smells great. Like, enjoy your food, man. I would never desecrate like your meal." And it was just very confusing for him.
That's like urinating from above on the colonel's grave.
Yeah. I was just like, "Come on, man." It's like we all love Popeye.
It's like, but what I'm doing is morally reprehensible, and it's designed to incur your rage. You're like, no, actually, those biscuits are the envy of my eye right now.
Yeah, it's like, why would I spit on such a delicious morsel of food? It was weird though. It took him off his game.
Well played.
He was having a bad day, man. It wasn't his fault. Like something happened, like bad job interview or something.
Everyone who comes on the subway and tries to fight is having a bad day.
100%.
You just can't indulge with someone having a bad day. Positive vibes only.
Well, I always like think about that in New York because once in a while someone will tell me to go back to my country, and I'm just like, you're having a bad day, man. You don't even know me. Like, what Asian girl broke your heart? You know, like.
I mean, typically when I'm chanting that about you, it's after one of your specifically bad takes.
But there's so many to choose from.
And that's why I'm chanting it.
You're exercising them.
It's not that sort of repetitive phrase. It's that I'm saying it so frequently that it sounds to the uninitiated as if it's a chant.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Really, I'm just absorbing each take from you and giving you my opinion on it.
Did you catch Donald Trump's tweet?
I have him blocked on Twitter.
That's smart, actually.
I have a lot of his ilk blocked. Not because I don't want them to read my tweets about Ben Simmons.
Wait, you tweet about Ben Simmons?
I have.
Oh, nice. I got to check it out.
And honestly, no one in Donald Trump's family has seen one of them.
Are you sure?
They might have some burners. But I don't want to encounter things that are potentially going to aggravate me unless I decide to. So, yes, will I click on that little hidden tweet 90% of the time? Sure. But sometimes I don't feel like it.
Oh, that was not the answer as I was expecting from you, because I agree with you.
What else is weird is that when I'll go back to my parents' house, they will have the national news on. And it's very weird because I can't digest news like that anymore. It was something that you always had in your household. It was something that we were completely accustomed to for all of our lives. And now, because of the way that we, I guess, consume news via Twitter, or whether it's Instagram or podcast or however, that format of being subjected to things you don't want to hear is very foreign now. Does that make sense?
Of course.
So, like, they'll be watching it and they'll, like, cut to Donald Trump. I'm like, get the fuck off the screen. Like, I don't want to see your face. I'm way more comfortable electing to read a tweet than I am to just have the news bring it to me in a arbitrary fashion that they choose that I should listen to them.
Well, you get to an interesting point, because after Donald Trump tweeted this, Dan Le Batard goes on ESPN and has a now viral take on it, and what he said was very political and very aligned with the way he thinks about race and politics. And do you think on a sports show it was the right time for him to do that? Like, if you're just tuning in for jokes and NBA takes and guests talking about baseball, and then Le Batard gets on and starts talking about the president, how do you feel? Are you like, oh, I didn't want to hear about Donald Trump?
I think what Dan Le Batard,
Good enough.
close enough. I think what he did was make a distinction between something that is a political opinion or a political perspective or viewpoint, and something that is racist. And I think he made a good distinction there and explained himself. And I'm sure the talking heads at ESPN and the suits, the people who pay the bills, were very unhappy by that because he called them out for needing to have a conversation about Colin Kaepernick in order to talk about racism, etc. And I didn't think it necessarily was political, and I think he really made that clear. Telling someone to go back to the place they came from is racist. If it's coming from a president...
It's an old racist trope. Yeah.
It's the racistest trope. It's
once a month someone says that to me.
That's the one.
A couple times a year, yeah.
And to call that out and say, that's racist, you can't do that, that's just insane.
Yeah.
It's fully acceptable. And I didn't even see that much wrath from the sort of stick to sports.
Yeah, that's
crowd.
Being shouted down.
I feel like most of them were sort of like,
yeah,
he kind of, I could be wrong. Yeah. I just mean in terms of the response to it, I didn't see a lot of the people just sort of being like, nah, liberals or whatever. That didn't really seem to be the feedback.
Yeah, and it's important to make a distinction between let's say we get into an awful conflict with Iran or something coming up, Sports Center is not going to be and guys, we're also at war, so take care of yourself and support our troops, whatever, Le Batard or someone like him with takes when we talk about athletes like Serena Williams or LeBron James, absolutely, who the president has called out by name, Colin Kaepernick, huge, even recently in the news about his policies with Nike, it's related to sports. And I think the first thing we have to talk about when we talk about sports is race. And as soon as we can include that into the discussion, it kind of opens up a big world of things to get into, as long as we're not scared of it, right? And as long as we're not assholes about it. And I'm a huge Le Batard fan, but this was bound to happen. Like the tipping point was bound to happen, and probably was going to happen with him because he's been kind of suggesting this for years. And it's interesting though, because I think about this face app thing that's happening right now, right? Like if this kind of virus, for lack of a better word, or just like vibe that people pick up on, it's like everyone's doing it, I want to do it. Everyone feels like, I think the problem I have getting older is like social media pushes me into thinking in like a total form of an idea. So on my Twitter, I kind of just stick to like food and basketball, but like that's not what I do for my day job, and I think about other things. But like Twitter's just for hoops for me. Instagram, I kind of just do animals. Like those platforms are not the totality of the way I think about anything. And I think where a face app virus pops up and everyone's just like, well, I need to do it because I need to be this fully formed thing. And if Donald Trump says something, I need to chime in with how I stand on it. Like, your silence is complicit. And I'm like, I don't think it is. Like, I don't think we should fault Taylor Swift for not taking a stand, or Beyonce. Like, let them care about what they care about and let them be private when they choose to.
I agree with that in terms of saying no one should be bullied into taking a stand publicly if they don't want to, because then it's holding someone who has a voice different to a different standard than people who don't have a voice. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I think if you look at someone who is, say, appropriating black culture in their music and then is notably silent when the president is saying racist things about Colin Kaepernick and players or black people, then it's like a little more
if
dicey.
We believe in appropriation.
But I'm right. Sure. I'm just saying, to me, there are a few more angles to it than simply like, hey man, if you want to say something, say something. If you don't, you don't. Like, sure, 100%. Sure, I get all that.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone has a responsibility to like stand up. I think it's cool. Mm-hmm. I like when people take an informed stand. I think Cardi B putting up a photo of Ilhan or
she's
supporting
just the best, though.
Bernie Sanders, it's like that shit is great.
Our queen. Cardi's the most fun.
But the thing with Trump, and I get what you're saying, is like if you're silent, you're complicit. And like there is a bit of an argument with that, only because I feel like media wants to be professional when they talk about Donald Trump, and they want to discuss the things he says as political gamesmanship or palace intrigue, and like in general, just DC as normal, like this chess match of he's invigorating his base, and it's like, yeah, you guys kept up with that shit, and like here's where we are because you guys were afraid to say Donald Trump doesn't actually have any policies besides white supremacy. Like that's like the glue to like literally everything he does outside of just sort of enriching himself and making his friends powerful. He's at
the take buffet. He just grabs whatever's closest to him. So if he sees like the ribs first, he's gonna load up on ribs and be like, "Oh, there's shrimp down there." I'm like, whatever's closest to him, he'll just like absorb. And like,
but I do think the only unifying thing is like Muslim ban, some good people on both sides, going against black athletes, going against black politicians, going against women, constantly, closing the border with Mexico.
Yeah,
villainizing Latinos. It's just war with brown people and women.
Yeah,
and gays and the trans community. It's just like the ultimate apex boomer.
Yeah.
It's the furious white male.
And he's in campaign mode. But it was just interesting in terms of like our microcosm of sports, and like I even think about it in like a small way, like when a trade goes down in the middle of the night and Kawhi signs, or if Kawhi signs, like our interns feel obligated to wake up out of bed and like rub our eyes, put on our glasses, and maybe taste a little bit of gruel for sustenance for the next 2 hours and tweet through it, right? But like, I'm talking about when it's Father's Day or Mother's Day and everyone's obligated to be like, my father's a true hero. Here's a picture of him. I'm like, we don't all need to do this. I'm like, oh, you're not doing this for your father? Do you not love him? I'm like, no, I just don't use this platform in that way.
Totally. And it's weird when you see that hive mind. Okay, we are all going to talk about Trump now. Mm-hmm. We're all going to do Face App. We're all going to post like a hot photo of our mom from, 1982.
Yeah.
And that's like just what we're collectively doing en masse. The Face App thing is interesting, though, because it went from, haha, look, I'm old, to, oh, you who just posted that funny thing, you sucker. You've handed all of your vital information over to, of all people, the Russians.
Which is interesting because this happened the first time this Face App came out, and we all knew it then. But it was like it worked too good. The results were too funny, right? Like, it was a well-designed app. So it's like I don't think vanity is a bad thing at all. And I think people should be able to enjoy how they look and, like, show other people. And, posting pictures of yourself now and 40 years later is fun. I get it. And it's almost worth the cost. And it gets into a situation where, like, on the surface, it's like, what's more self-important? Thinking that your data is valuable or posting a picture of yourself? Or does your data matter? And I started kind of getting stony about it and being like, does, like, our individual data point matter? So a lot of people are like, I'm willing to, the Russians probably have everything anyway. I'm like, while that may be true, it's interesting. It's like, if I shoot 25 good shots and one shot is like a lousy shot, do I give myself like an out? Like, what does one thing do to affect the larger picture of my shooting? It's like, oh, I could just toss away one thing, right? And my data is just like one thing in a big wave of like, and that's how polling works and voting works. It's like, does my vote really matter? I'm like, the realists are like, not really.
Well, we know that companies like Facebook, and probably Twitter, YouTube, whoever, have already been harvesting all of our data for a really long time.
So long.
And now that we have more concern about this because it's been divulged that they were selling it, misusing it, not protecting it, etc. Now we're like, wait, but our data. So we kind of are now adopting the same sort of concerns about technology that almost our parents had.
Yeah,
this, like,
right.
element of paranoia where it's
Orson
like, well,
Welles.
you've already given it all up, though. And we've given it to companies like Facebook, which are bad. We have given them to pernicious entities for years, for like a decade. And now we're like, now the Russians. That said, you might want to avoid giving perfect like renditions of your likeness on a platter to a company in a way that they don't have to like sift through your Instagram. You're just like, here you go, guys. And like, thanks.
But all you do have to do is frame it in a way of being like, okay, if you have your data taken, then if you're on vacation, like Jordo, shout out to Jordo, on his 7th Mai Tai now, I just got a text, and be like, okay, you're going to be on an island, and then your bank account's going to be zero. And I'm like, ooh, I do not want that. I'm like, that's like a far-fetched consequence, but isn't that scarier, than like policy change? A sea change that we can't really observe, right? But if they have all this data, so, some arguments would be like, well, I have nothing to like hide, so why is my data bad? You can have it. And I'm like, well, they find out where you live, they find out what taxes you pay, they change like these little policies, right? And you can't really see it.
Also, is it worse if the Russians have it than some other foreign national or someone in
the Russians
America?
Is so boomer, right? It's like, it's the Russians.
But
and
it
I'm
just
like,
feeds
it
so
is
much
the
into
Russians.
like, no, they're going to use this to like affect the next election. Like, okay, maybe, but also the whole Russian collusion thing, whatever their relationship with the Trump camp. It was like, yeah, they like fucked around with Facebook and did some like, you're like, oh, they sent up some tweets. And you're like, all right, well, like
Real talk. Yeah, for
but like
sure.
whatever the efficiency that, I'm like, all right, this hysteria about the Russians in particular strikes me as being very Cold War.
Yeah, that's why I say boomer. Like, it is very Reagan, Gorbachev, you know? It's just like, you're undermining us. And I'm like, well, can we see how they're undermining us? Like, okay, so they made these memes. And I'm like...
But the interns make memes.
Yeah. Wait, are the interns Russian?
No. The Russians were shit posting. You're like,
Alexei, no more gruel.
Vladimir?
Dmitry.
Niet. But, right, it was like they organized a bunch of morons in Tallahassee to show up at a Walmart. And you're like, yeah, but another moron in Tallahassee could have done that.
And, you know, and there's a case to be made for, like, maybe they targeted, like, certain things, and those things, like, they picked their shots, you know, like, they picked their spots, you know, and this is the whole Yang Gang thing, and he was just like, we're talking about the wrong thing. We just have to talk about these voters right here, like truckers and Walmart, people who work at Walmart.
But also, not to turn this into Red Scare or anything, but if we're going to gripe about a foreign country tinkering around in our electoral process.
Are you going gerrymandering?
I just mean, we've been doing this to everybody forever.
For sure. I know, it's crazy. It's like us accusing Joe for being fat. I'm like, stay off the Doritos, Joel Embiid, as I'm stuffing Doritos into my face.
No carb on carb, as you say, with a slab of ravioli pizza.
Shoot, you coward. I'm like, oh, I can't play, man. No way. I don't want to get hurt, man.
Like, we were dropping, like, propaganda pamphlets on every country in Asia.
Yeah.
As we deforested them. It's like,
Yeah.
no, someone's messing with our election.
Well, it's interesting that we're talking...
What about the Contras?
It's an interesting discussion how, like, people kind of mess with our minds without us, like, being aware, like being able to see it from a distance. And there's that Wall Street Journal article that came out recently about hoops, and it was like, are robots going to be the next coaches for basketball? And, you know, Wall Street Journal is owned by, like, Rupert Murdoch, and everything on there I kind of, like, absorb with, you know, that knowledge in mind. And basically the article was the title was very delicious, right? Like, I'm like, ooh, I'm gonna click the hell out of this and see what they're talking about. Like, baseball just used a minor league team just used a robotic umpire, no sin bin, and it's very controversial. It feels like we're maybe giving up control a little bit. The article itself didn't say anything. Basically, it was like,
well, the headline, for those who haven't read it, was, computers are the new basketball coaches. Today's players will not argue with a computer. The latest shot tracking technology in basketball is the latest sign. Come on, an echo in your header? Get the fuck out of here. Get an editor. The latest shot tracking technology in basketball is the latest sign of a profound shift in the making of professional athletes. Come on, edit. Your guys hire someone over from the New York Post. They're the kings.
Get better interns, man.
Give the same job. Come on, Wall Street Journal. You're owned by Rupert. New York Post, the best headline writers in the business.
That's true. But the guts of the article wasn't anything new, and so it kind of talks about, like, how baseball's changed and how, like, home runs and strikeouts, kind of like Moneyball-ish stuff, and shot tracking in the NBA, and how, like, shots are valued differently now, and how coaches are responding to that. And I'm like, oh, it feels like the Wall Street Journal is trying to create a divide, right? Like, these nerds are dangerous. This article has nothing but nerd bait.
But also this idea that the modern player will just listen to a robot coach spitting out numbers, but no longer will talk to the guy with, like, the sweaty gym shirt and the whistle yelling, like, get down in your crouch. Now do some more crouching. Get over there and crouch. Yeah. Crouch some more.
Yeah. And it's already happening. A lot of these coaches, like D'Antoni, they use numbers. in game for information, and they make substitutions based off of numerical information. Like just like raw data. They have someone with a clipboard just being like, Tucker's no good against this guy, man. Yank him. And like that's how we do things now. And I want robot umpires for baseball because I believe in like slimming down the simulation. Sorry, that's really pretentious, but like I just want it to be the best game that we can get. I don't like arguing. I don't like Bjorn Borg and McEnroe arguing over calls. I just want to know if it's out or in.
I'm not sure which app they described or discussed in the article. I just sort of skimmed the early part. But I've used one that's called Home Court.
You love this thing, man. You send me like your stats.
I think I've mentioned it on the show before. Maybe not. I don't know. But I haven't used it in a while because to use it, you have to have access to more or less a whole half court to yourself, which if you're in New York is a rarity. You don't often
Doesn't happen, man.
get to show up at an empty gym and be able to put your iPhone on the ground with an unobstructed view of the court and record yourself shooting. But I had signed up for a gym a while ago, and no one was ever there. So I was able to use it quite a bit. So I logged something like, 8,000 shots over the course of a few weeks. Then people started showing up, and I couldn't do it. But it is really cool. It is absolutely a cool-ass app if you have the opportunity to actually use it. And what it does is that it kind of hones in using the camera on the backboard and rim, and then you sort of take a foul shot, and it kind of cues everything up, however you want to say that, primes it kind of. So then it
calibrates it.
Calibrates it. That would be the technical word. But so then you just shoot, and it tells you where you shot from, and it breaks it down into areas, whether it's in the lane, it's the short corner, 3-point range, above the arc, top of the key, foul shot, etc.
Some Goldsworthy shit.
Yeah, it's exactly that kind of. It's not a spray chart, but you might even be able to view it like that. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But really cool, and it gives you your numbers and your percentages. And like I was at the gym the other day, and there was some kid there, and he was shooting around by himself, and I mentioned to him, and he said he had used it. So like,
so cool.
People are aware of this.
Yeah, yeah.
And what it really does, to me at least, is that it's not about ignoring your coaches. It's about giving you a tool that you just didn't have access to if you weren't on, say, an AAU team.
Yeah.
And some of these, they talk about the angle on your shot, and they have all these other elements to it to, I guess, hone your ability to shoot. I don't know anything about that. But I will say, it was fucking cool to see your numbers from different spots on the floor. And it made you work harder. It made you focus more because you knew they were being logged. And it made you want to go out there and get a bunch of shots up to see if you improved. And, like, I wish I had that when I was younger and was, like, trying to play on organized teams and really was focused on hoops. That would have been such a cool device. So, anyway, if you want to try it, Home Court, I do vouch for that shit. Even though it costs like $8 a month after you use up your 300 free shots, which is like an hour.
Or like a quarter for Kobe Bryant. But I always, and I mentioned this before, like weeks ago maybe, like I always like imagine these articles that kind of had this Orwellian threat to them, where I'm just like, I want to reverse Black Mirror, being like, robot coaches are going to take over the NBA, and you're going to be the best player you've ever been. They're going to like maximize your potential, and everyone's not going to take bad shots. Ben Simmons is already there. It's like, Ben Simmons, you're so good at being a regular power forward. Dunk every ball. It's like, yes, robot coach, I will dunk every ball.
What is the trajectory on your dunk? Perfect.
Yeah.
Slam jam, a rim rocker.
You're shooting 60% from the floor. But like, and I had a buddy work at IBM for the last 10 years, and he'd been working on AI the whole time. And this idea that this stuff is like around the corner is funny, right? Because it's already here. Like, I bumped into someone the other night who was just like, oh, I'm off the grid. And I'm like, wait, but you're holding a cell phone and you have a tab at the bar. It's like, oh, I'm not on Facebook. And I'm like, okay, you're fully on the grid, man. But like, I get what you mean. And like, the less we know, the more funny stuff will happen. But I'm with you. Like, I think this article, I wanted to read it, and in my mind, I'm like, it's a Wall Street Journal, so it's going to be like probably further away from liking science than hating science. But all these things are kind of good. Like, I love how getting on an airplane is kind of more streamlined, more and more as they're learning, because it's like, you pay for it. But technology kind of helps us in all these ways that like we take for granted. And then when we get scared because someone tells us to get scared, it's like, it's kind of terrifying. But
at the same time, though, there is a dehumanizing element to all of this, where there does seem to be an encroaching cataclysm where like everything you have is in this cloud. And how do you protect it? That we have these in our mind. There are parties who are interested in getting into your shit all the time. Like, how many times does your Facebook, get a notification that some bot tried to get a password reset? It's like that there are malicious parties who are probably one step ahead of the defenders, who are eternally trying to get into your phone or into your email or into your bank account. And you're like, how is this sustainable? We're just going to have this arms race of people who are trying to infiltrate and breach your data? Or does it reach a point where, and I think we are there, where it's just assumed that your shit gets breached all the time, and then you just kind of like move along with it?
It depends on what your how far your view is, right? Because in a vacuum, in an election cycle, like you have politicians being like, oh, these bad things are going to happen and we need to fix them. But then when you pull back, you're like, oh, change is at kind of a constant rate. And like the Industrial Revolution was terrifying for people. The nuclear bomb was like a mind blower. The internet, which is kind of like old now, was like a big burst, but like it's kind of like innovation has plateaued a little bit. And it depends on how you see it, right? Because someone could steal your identity when you're on a vacation. I think Jordo's on his 10th Mai Tai now. But like, and your identity could be stolen and you could zero out your bank account, and that's cataclysmic for you. But to the next person, it's just like, so what? And it's a really interesting thing. It's like that.
Or are we in a place
box,
where it's
right?
like, hey, my bank account just got zeroed out, and the bank's like, oh yeah, that happens. Here's your money back. Just because you get breached.
Yes.
We all get breached now, and no one's to blame. You didn't do anything wrong. It just happened. It was your turn.
Yeah.
Like in the roulette wheel of having your shit stolen and your ID taken, your number came up.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's hard because like these news outlets like Wall Street Journal, like they're trying to stay in business, man. So like these articles are kind of delicious, and what we see on TV, what we choose to see. And that's like a tough thing with Twitter, because like I just curate my feed. So all I'm hearing is like I lean a certain way, and like what Batard said was not any way kind of like noticeable to me. I was like, yeah, it's weird that we have to say it, but I got no problems with that.
You had mentioned the Wall Street Journal story being divisive, and it's an easy schism to exploit when you're talking about numbers and the future and technology versus the eye test and grit and heart and clutch genes.
Rise and grind, baby.
So like that falls into that paradigm as well. And obviously we're going to talk about it because we talk about Ben Simmons all the time. He's one of the foremost examples of this, that numbers say he's really good. And people who are infuriated by his reluctance to take jumpers think he sucks. And we saw that come to a high watermark this last week, because he signed an extension with Philadelphia 76ers for a max deal of $170 over 5 years.
A very interesting contract, though.
How so?
It's based off of his All-NBA team, if he makes an All-NBA team. So if he doesn't make any All-NBA team, he does not make the max. He's kind of very far from it.
I can't remember, though, if that's tied into, like, the typical one.
Oh, okay.
The way, like, it's always done that. There's, like, the regular max, but if you're All-NBA, then you get, like,
I believe it's as low as like 170 something.
But
if he doesn't
170, I want to say, was the most you could possibly get.
Okay.
And then there's the other incentives on it
Yeah.
that were tied to making all NBA teams.
But he's going to make it because power forwards like Kevin Durant is hurt, so he's not going to be there next year, and he can take Blake Griffin.
I agree. One of the greatest power forwards in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah,
But
he
the
doesn't
thing-
have much competition.
But there was a lot of people angry about that contract, which is, one, hilarious considering
How good he is.
he's good, but like Jamal Murray money,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, the Jamal Murray bag.
like any, I mean, any good guy, any good player, like not even an all-star, just a good player after 4 years in the league gets a max.
Yeah.
Like they all do. Because it's not even the same as like the big boy max. They all get it. Inez Cantor was a max player.
Whew.
Plan A.
That's right.
Cantor. But he was a max player. Shout out to the interns who predicted Horford opting out.
Way back in January.
And Cantor going to Boston January
Cantor.
28th.
What do they
Interns,
know that we don't know?
They get a-
Where are their sources?
They get a dollop of gruel for their troubles.
No, a dollop less gruel.
Less gruel. It's both a reward and a punishment.
This just
Less
seems to
gruel.
be working. We're going to take away more gruel.
But yeah, so as a Simmons enthusiast, I was not surprised by the contract, and it made total sense.
I was pleased, man.
But the outcry was as we anticipated, though, right? I mean,
Yeah.
who are the enemies of dunks who popped up?
Are you saying Boomer's going to boom?
I mean, they always boom. But I'm saying we saw like, I'm trying to think. We saw.
Trying to name names?
Yeah, I'm saying I feel like we saw a general consensus that like it's okay to pay him this money, but he's got to learn to shoot jumpers.
So all over ESPN, I know a lot of people don't watch these day shows, but I kind of love them. And every talking head, weirdly, except for Isola, was just like, you can't give him the last shot in a big game because he can't shoot. So if you have a player who's that compromised and you pay him the max, you're already compromising the vision of your team moving forward. And I'm like, man, Tim Duncan didn't take mid-range jumpers to win games because he was just winning games. Like, you don't want to be in a close situation. Like, Kobe shot so many game-winning attempts is because he was so inefficient. His team was always kind of, like, even with his competition. Whatever. But, like, yeah.
Well, it also ties into that idea, right? That engaging how good a team is. A game that ends with a coin flip doesn't prove anything.
Yeah, it's...
And granted, that can win you a championship.
Yeah.
No doubt. But it's a coin flip.
And I just remember that insanely amazing inbounds play he had last season at the end of the season to win that game on a dunk. I'm like, that's a game winner. He dunked it to win the game.
I mean, I don't even want
I'm a douche.
to totally get into all like the Simmons takes, but
It's fun, man. He's
but
like...
the part that I find fascinating about him is that if you said Steph Curry needs a post game and to become a rim protector, everyone would think you were a clown. If you said, hey man, Joel Embiid needs to become a better passer and stop turning the ball over.
Anthony Davis only averages 2.1 assists in his career. He's got to get that up, man, to 5 at least.
Anthony Davis can't really hit threes.
If you can't pass and hit threes, like, how good is Davis?
So it's this idea that almost every player except for maybe LeBron James you can look at and say, oh, you can do something better. Kawhi Leonard, also not a good passer. Doesn't create good looks for his teammates that much.
We're all Tiger moms, like, 40 points, why not 41? You know, it's like, dude, he's an all-star. He's good. He's very good.
And I think that the obsession with Simmons' jumper should have the same urgency or lack of urgency as, like, Tobias Harris needs to be a better defender.
100%.
Everyone can become a better player.
How did J.J. Redick get away, man? Like, come on.
The guy was arguably the worst defensive player in the NBA and just, like, left unscathed for, like, another $24 million at 34 years old.
Not even unscathed. Some people's takes were like he's secretly the most important player on the team. I'm like, dude, you got to get him off the squad. You have to not play him.
It's like Tobias Harris can't pass or defend. Joel Embiid is not a good passer.
So
he turns the ball over a lot. Like, all these guys have room for improvement, yet somehow Simmons is the one that everyone's like, now this guy, he's a bum. Like, what the hell, man? Like, all these dudes are great players.
And obviously,
Giannis can't shoot.
Obviously, it's because Simmons is like handsome and like millennial. But I was thinking about this: if Simmons was like more out of shape and he had 20 more pounds on him and he was much slower, people would be like, "Oh, he's an all-star level power forward. Like, he's a center. Like, every all-star team, Ben Simmons center." It's the fact that he's fast and skinny. People are so mad at him because it doesn't align with our eye test.
It's the optics where people see him 12 feet from the basket, not interested in taking a shot, and they're like, fuck this man. Right. I take that shot over at the JCC every time I get it, and I make some of them.
Right.
How am I, me, who does this at the YMCA, taking that shot, and this guy is scared?
Ben, you got to keep the defenses honest.
You got to keep him honest, man. So it all falls into a couple categories. It falls into that he has no heart, that he doesn't work on his game, that he doesn't care. It's about disrespect. It's never about and then there's like the efficiency things where effectiveness, they'll close out on him if he takes it. Like, bullshit.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, though, is that remember how that happened to LeBron against Dallas, right? He was a choker. He had no heart. He was afraid. He was a shrinking violet in the moment in the finals where Dirk Nowitzki became a beloved player by beating LeBron James. But if you go back and you look at that roster, it suddenly makes a lot more sense. They didn't have any fucking shooters. Yeah. So when LeBron James was standing there and the Mavericks were packing
put some
the court,
respect on Donnell Marshall's name, man.
It is wild, though. You look at their lineup. They were playing Joel Anthony.
Oh, whoa.
They were playing Udonis Haslem.
Was that the Dellavedova? No. This is the Heat. This is the Heat.
The Heat. They were playing Wade, who's not a shooter. Bosch didn't shoot any threes at that stage of his career. Those were 4 guys out of their lineup.
Yeah.
So, you go back and you look, and you're like, wait a minute. We were all putting this on LeBron in the exact same way people are putting it on Ben Simmons as being a choker or not having heart when it's personnel driven. Then the Heat came back and they added Ray Allen. They added Shane Battier, and all of a sudden they wiped the floor with people.
And this, the NBA started in 1996, but previous to that, people were playing games. And this was the vibe with Michael Jordan. Everyone's just like, he's not Magic Johnson because he can't win the big game. He's just like a dunker like Dominique Wilkins. He's not a complete player. They draft Scottie Pippen, and the rest is history. Not NBA history, but just history of people playing basketball.
Prehistory.
Yeah.
Prehistoric NBA.
Right.
But, yeah, it was wild to see the exact same phraseology and critiques that go towards Simmons being levied at LeBron, the greatest of all time, for basically responding similarly to the way that Simmons does when the Sixers put him out there with Boban in the lane and have guards that can't shoot. And you're like, oh, right. These guys whose job is to get to the basket and kick the ball out, they need to play with dudes who clear the lane. This isn't that difficult.
But isn't this a face-app situation where it's just like, we're obsessed with the NBA. We talk about the NBA nonstop. When the mics are off, we still talk about the NBA. We love this thing. But to someone who's just has other interests and maybe are not into it, it's like, yes, that's interesting. Ben Simmons is a flawed max player, and therefore the Sixers are making an error. They're just saying that. No one actually means it, because it's just like, everyone's doing this face app thing. What do I look like? And I think it's just kind of a viral take that makes sense, but when you sit down with it, it doesn't work anymore, and you're like, the Russians own it.
I mean, we've said all this shit a million times, and apologies to people who are sick of hearing about Ben Simmons, but you're right. It's just something to say, because the numbers don't add up. Yeah. If you looked at the Philadelphia 76ers starting lineup last season after they acquired Tobias Harris and Jimmy Butler, they had an offensive rating of 122, which was one of the best in the NBA out of 5-man lineups, behind only Golden State and I think maybe one of the Raptors lineups or something. So considering the time that we're in this generation with offensive productivity, with Ben Simmons in the lineup, the Sixers had arguably one of the best offenses in the history of the NBA.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, but isn't it crippled by them? Isn't that the problem? Okay, no. It's only in the playoffs and only late in games. It's like, nah, man. One of the best offenses ever.
And on Twitter, you kind of mentioned this. There's like a wrinkle in fandom sometimes that I think Knicks fans are really victim of. It's just like, some Philly fans want to see Ben Simmons fail at this so they can mock him. So they don't want him to succeed. They don't want better spacing. They don't want to keep the defense honest. They just want to mock their player and become martyrs, right? Being like, oh, no, another failed signing by the Sixers. I'm like, oh, you guys just love this like hatred thing. And like, it's a kind of fan, right?
I mean, those guys like accuse me of being a troll for saying, I think Simmons is good and they just need to put the right personnel around him. I think Jimmy Butler is really good. I think the problem with the Sixers is not one of their 3-star players.
This is my favorite.
I mean, I don't think I'm saying anything that's even controversial or even. It's weird that I'm more with conventional wisdom than the people who think I'm being non-genuine. I'm like, no, they have really good players, that they're fine. The issues are the bad players.
This is the thing I'm obsessed with politics about. Like, whoever calls someone racist first gets to start that narrative. Sort of like karma doesn't really work because whoever declares it first has their starting point. So it's just like, oh, well, the Clippers are going to have some karmic retribution for screwing over the Lakers. I'm like, oh, you're starting with that. Okay, because I thought the Lakers were suffering from karma, right? So the first person to accuse you of being contrarian is the person who gets to start it, which is just bullshit.
If that sounds like I'm whining, I'm not. It's just
it's an argumentative thing on
it's just
on
more
Twitter
of
that's annoying.
It's more strange than anything else because I'm like, no, these guys are known as stars. They're good. It's cool.
Yeah.
It's no big deal. But it's weird though. Simmons has acquired just a reputation that he's kind of a disappointment. He can't shoot, so he's flawed, and he's not a star until he does that. Because we've seen other players almost get compartmentalized as being cartoons. And, J.R. Smith is a guy who
Knicks
didn't
legend.
play all last year. Knicks legend. Played with AI in the Nuggets. Legendary.
Some of those dunks were wild. Holy moly, those dunks, man.
Played with the New Orleans Hornets, perhaps?
Yeah, dude. He's had a long career.
Storied, even.
Dude, a success. He's a full-on success.
He's also like a meme of human Henny Palooza.
Yeah. And it didn't help that he's a mercurial guy. He's really interesting. He doesn't really have the boomerisms that people want. Like, I just play to win. He's just he's on Instagram, posting the wrong stuff with the weird captions, and he doesn't know the score of a really big playoff or finals game.
Yeah, that one could be held against him, perhaps.
Yeah, but there's mistakes throughout the whole game, and that's egregious. I think everyone needs to know that score in that situation, but he didn't.
It was something to pay attention to. To note.
But there's other players Dion Waiters just wrote something for the Players Tribune this week about people mocking him constantly.
Was it a new one?
I think so. It was recent about he posted a picture of him slimmed down. He was like,
I remember when he wrote the one about kind of coming out of Philly and detailed about the environment in which he grew up in and the tragedies that had befallen a lot of people that were close to him.
Yeah, I believe I'm guilty of not reading. I just don't read. But I think
reading is so played.
There's so much 90s rap to listen to. I just got to get in my cipher, in my mind.
Give me some Gemini the Gifted one and get out of the way.
But I think he wrote about him suffering as a joke, people making fun of his weight and people making fun of the way he plays, and him just being yo, I came from a lot, and it's a really hard thing to do what I'm doing.
You sure this isn't an article from 2 years ago?
Not sure. I'm willing to take that L. But also other players, we're seeing Taco Fall play he played the Summer League, and he benefited from a great name. But he captured people's imagination, and people wanted to see Taco Fall. And he kind of turned into more than just a player. He turned into an event. So when he's on the court, it was we stop looking at all the things that make him bad, and we're just like, why isn't this guy signed? How come the Celtics haven't done it? Like, he can't play in the NBA. I would say Jeremy Lin also falls into here because he became bigger than, like, life, right?
But, right, so look at J.R. Smith doesn't have a team, or unless he signed today, I forget.
He might be signed for 2 years, I think, with the... Why is my brain farting? Look it up.
He met with the Bucks, apparently.
They haven't signed him?
I don't think so. I think he met with them. That was the latest. But he has not had a team. Lance Stevenson is another guy who kind of is a human meme in the flesh who does not have a team. And Jeremy Lin, same deal. These are guys who kind of stand for something in a way that a Chucky Atkins or just
Anthony Randolph.
Just a weird, a journeyman who to flesh out your roster. You don't pick J.R. Smith necessarily, or Lynn, or Lance for a reason.
Yeah. And, like, sometimes they do find landing spots. I kind of think of, like, Skip to Mylou, like Rafer Alston. Like, he was kind of an anomaly being like, what are you doing here? And he became a really good player with a smart team in Houston. But you're right. And, like, all these players kind of... Jordan Bell is on this track, also being the greatest Knick of all time. He's also still on that track. But it's these things that we gravitate towards, and it feels mean. It just feels specific, and when we see it, some people call it out, and I'm like, stop doing that. Like, JaVale McGee is a really interesting guy, and he doesn't talk about hoops like LeBron James does, or even like Lonzo Trier. It's like, you got to play in summer league if you're not up for the task.
He is a
boomer.
Very tiresome individual.
Yeah, I'm not into him, and I'm just not into him. But, like...
He's fine. I wish him the best of luck.
Yeah, exactly.
I hope he
not
has
personal.
An incredible basketball career. I just don't love his takes.
Yeah, and they're like... No one asks, like... No, that meme was like, says no one. It's like, if you're not up to the task in summer league, then how can you handle the regular season? I'm like, yeah, you're just good or you're not. I don't know. But
also, you're too young to have these crusty-ass takes.
Hey, man, RJ Barrett. The crustiest. But like Bol, right? Like, my heart goes out to him because he falls really far in the draft, and he becomes like kind of more of a folk hero than someone that is taken seriously as a baller. And he's gonna suffer this fate where when he checks into the game, people are gonna kind of half mockingly cheer for him, right?
Yeah, I do think there's an odd dynamic with some of these guys, and I don't know if there's a racial component or not, but there's something weird about the way that J.R. Smith and Lance are larger than life, and
Dion Waiters, for sure.
Dion Waiters. And, maybe it's just that it's tough to be a white guy with that much personality or swagger.
Yeah.
There aren't a lot of white dudes in the NBA from America who can sort of be that kind of character. As you said, like maybe Birdman was someone like that.
What about Scalabrine? Does he fall into that category? Like, is he larger than...
But I almost feel like he's the exact opposite, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was, or like Matt Bonner. Like, not to say that we're not deserving of spots, but they kind of hovered under the radar, were kind of fan favorites who just kept sticking on rosters for a long time, even when they didn't play much. But it's like people just don't want the trouble of dealing with Lance or JR. Yeah. It's partially their doing, but I don't know. There's something about celebrating them for their flaws that
this makes me sad.
It's a little creepy, and not to say that we haven't done it ourselves.
100.
We've all done it.
Yeah. We fall into
Lance, look at him. He cooked him. Oh, wow, what a ridiculous
play. That guitar, right?
Yeah, it's like we love it.
Yeah, and this makes me especially sad when I think about Markelle Fultz, and the career hopefully he's looking at. I want him to be in the NBA for 10 years, but already he's out of control of his own story. And we're going to inflict all this grief on this kid who's going through something that we'll never really understand.
Yeah, the Fultz situation hasn't seemingly improved after he was traded out of Philadelphia. Him getting
he was a number one overall pick, man.
And not long ago.
He looked good in college.
Well, he was the consensus number one pick, and
No doubt.
he went to Orlando to get a fresh start. And the latest out of the Magic organization is that they don't know when he's going to play. So my assumption would be that he's not playing basketball and that he's not any closer to being the prospect that he was destined to be.
Yeah, and like it's kind of especially sad seeing. I think many teams, if you're not winning games, you should have inquired about Markelle Fultz. He still has incredible value there. I still hold to my take that like the Sixers just could have used him as a ball stopper, just like chase down players on defense, you know. But even Orlando admitting they don't know what to do is kind of a bummer because it doesn't incentivize them to say that. So something is up.
Obviously, this is all very speculative about him,
100.
and we've talked about him, and everyone has many, many times over.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to say delicately, without drawing any conclusions, I think he's probably surrounded by the wrong people. He may need to seek counsel outside of the basketball court.
We would just,
he may need some other people who have his interest in heart and care about him and can give him a different perspective because this has now gone on for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And without saying it's medical or not, it seems to be that there are some constant variables around him that have not changed while time has gone by. I don't know if that was like an annoyingly oblique way of discussing it. Like, sorry if it was. I
said always only in that, like, I've always thought about, like, I've only lived in New York. So I've always thought about New York this way. It's like, and a lot of people are aspirational. They move here and they have aspirations. And sometimes you bump into someone who's like, I just want to be a writer, but I can't get the things going. And I was like, who do you hang out with? Like, do you hang out with other writers? You're like, I can't stand other writers. I'm like, that might have a lot to do with it. And like, you always have to surround, like, that's the most important thing in anyone's career is like surrounding yourself with the right people. And if I was a GM, I would look at that immediately. Like, who's his best friend? What does he think about? You know, like, and I know Ainge does that, and I know Morey, and all the good GMs kind of investigate that. But Markelle Fultz was so pristine as a talent that you're almost willing to be like, well, he's young, like, friends are fluid, and he's going to make new friends.
I mean, I don't even know if it's his friends.
Yeah, it's speculation, 100.
I'm just saying, and I'm not pointing at any direct person. I'm just saying, from my understanding, his circle has remained pretty much the same throughout this.
And it's been written about, so we're not even gossiping.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything that hasn't been discussed elsewhere. I just don't feel like getting into like gossip about his family and his
let's not do
parental figures, etc.
Yeah. But back to your point, it's like he's at the risk of becoming like this joke, which is going to be really mean. And like in every like thing that you're interested in, there's always going to be like some Schadenfreude being like Shaqtin' in a fool. Like I have a really tough time with that bit on NBA on TNT, and I just think it's mean, but it's not funny ever. So it's just like there's no self-awareness, right? Like it's just someone fumbling a ball and Shaq laughing at them, which is like sometimes funny. But like,
I mean, the plays themselves are kind of funny because we like basketball, but the presentation is like you did something dumb and Shaq is laughing at your ineptitude or your stupidity.
And he goes at JaVale, and JaVale's clapped back, being like, "Yo, get off my back," you know? And it just feels like we manufacture this as another wrinkle to talk about something that we think we understand more than like someone else, you know? Like you cannot have Kyrie Irving. He's just poison. Look what he did in Boston. He's like a negative. And I'm like, dude.
I mean, it's weird to have someone like Markelle Fultz who might be defined for the rest of his life as a mysterious NBA bust. And like that does suck, right? You know, he's going to be 60, 70 years old, and he'll walk down the street, and someone will be like, was that Markelle Fultz?
Yeah.
But 2 points here. One, he's made enough money despite the fact that he hasn't done anything.
$10 million a year,
in
right?
the NBA. to live a financially stable life. That's beautiful. Like, this is his third year. He's gotten paid 3 seasons, and it was probably like, whatever, 8, 9 or something. He's made a lot of money, and hopefully, this is not saying money is a cure-all. I'm saying hopefully
it's a big deal, man.
He's earned enough.
Get paid.
That he will be a wealthy person for the rest of his life off of this sport that didn't work out for him. So, like, shout out to that. Secondly, though, time goes on. We can't name, like, the biggest movie stars from, like, the first half of the last century. We literally don't know who they were. No one's going to remember Markel Fultz in 25 years. They won't. He's like 20 years old. Yeah, sure, we'll know him as a bust. But like 25 years from now, who cares?
I mean, this is tough, right? This is the whole, like, I got my identity stolen when I was on vacation. Everyone's like, well, who cares? That happens all the time. It's tough because, like, sometimes it does work out and you disappear and you fall away and life is, like, not to get too heavy, but, like, time does go on. Especially in the NBA when you see all these players get older. But, I mean, he's still so young, man. It's still on the table for him. So maybe we can say that in 5 to 10 years. But right now, it's just like he still has a chance to be a great player.
Sure. I'm just meaning 20 years ago, Michael Aloakandi was the first pick. He was a bust.
Candyman.
Like, sure, some like basketball nerds can make a joke about Michael Aloakandi. No one else gives a shit about Michael Aloakandi.
And vice versa, Danny Manning was an awesome Clippers #1 overall pick, and no one cares about Danny Manning.
One of the best college basketball players I've ever seen when he was at Kansas. Just a monster.
What year was this?
It was before the NBA even started.
This is where I was going. Is he just
no one even mentioned. I don't even know the last time I heard the name Danny Manning. One of the best college players of all time and a #1 pick. No one even talks about him.
I liked how soft he looked. He was like doughy with no like muscle tone, and he had like these long arms, huge wingspan. He was just the coolest looking player.
Joe Smith, Glenn Robinson, on the spectrum of like great to bust.
Big dog.
Who gives a fuck? There are guys who stand out for being phenomenally great, and they're the ones we'll care about.
I think about Rick Adelman a lot because he was such like a staple NBA coach, and like my perception of him is like he's going to be coaching forever. Rick Adelman doesn't age. He doesn't eat food. He just exists forever as a pretty good coach, and we haven't seen him in years. Donnie Nelson, who's like one of my favorite guys.
No, he's there hanging out with the Mavs.
He's so good. Is he?
I think he's in the front office just
smoking weed,
adding white European players left and right.
I like him, man.
Well, yeah. Is he Don Nelson? He's another guy that we talk about.
That's what I just said, Donnie Nelson.
Are you talking about his son, Donnie?
Oh my God, he has a son named Donnie.
Yeah, Donnie Nelson works in the Mavs front office. He might be the GM. Then Don.
I called him Donnie out of love, Don.
Well, that was why you got me all tied up.
No, I was like, isn't he smoking weed on some island with Jordo?
Yeah. They're swapping pinky rings and gold chains.
But right, like, I mean, you're getting into a huge conversation about like time lurching on in sports, which is like a heartbreaking one, especially like when you follow, seeing Melo break down physically, but also like emotionally, like it's hard. I don't like it. Like, I will always remember him as that baller from Syracuse,
One of the truly dark parts of being a sports fan is that you get to see the full trajectory of an athlete's career over a small portion of your life.
Yeah.
And it's long enough to be meaningful. Yeah. But to your point, we saw Carmelo at 18 years old. And then 15 years later or whatever, he's kind of out of the NBA. 15 years is a long time for anybody. But that's it. That's the duration of his career. It's not like, okay, it's Robert De Niro. We're going to be watching him making The Intern 7.
Smart movie.
20 years from now.
Sure.
Some people have careers that last decades and decades and decades. Filmmakers, actors, chefs, whatever, writers, all these people.
Athletes is a window.
Are not afforded that.
Yeah.
And you look at someone like Kevin Durant, who had
I hate it. I
a
hate
horrible injury, and I don't even want to go down that,
Yeah.
grim pathway.
Sucks.
But just that idea that you don't even know necessarily when things are going to change.
Yeah, and not to get too dark, this is always like a kind of like a glimmer in the back of my mind when I watch the draft, which is like my favorite thing. And like in the recesses of my mind, at its most emo state, it's just like, oh, there's going to be 20 guys who are out of the league because these guys are going to enter the league. So the last guy on the bench is going to be out of a job. So if you're like, I don't know, the proverbial Rick Brunson on your team, you're just like, oh, they drafted a point guard, out. It's done. And I think it's really sad because these guys, the last guy on the bench is always like, if I work really hard, maybe I can crack the lineup. It's like, oh, you're done because we drafted Ja Morant.
In union talk, that idea is described as like eating your young, where it's that the guys who have times that are or have time committed, invested, and therefore more clout and power will sell out the ones who are newest in. And that happens, if I remember correctly, with things like police forces, where they'll be like, well, we get our pensions, but the new guys in, they're only going to make $22,000 a year, and they're not going to get these benefits. But the guys who've been there for a while, they'll be rewarded because the decision makers enrich themselves. And we had a similar situation recently where Chris Paul has drawn some criticism because he was the head of the Players Association when they negotiated the last collective bargaining agreement with the NBA ownership group and the commissioner, et cetera. And there's now some scrutiny and criticism because he's being accused of exactly what I just described, that putting a system in place that enriched and rewarded older veterans and superstars in a way that perhaps took some food out of the mouths of...
Gruel? Gruel?
Took some gruel out of the mouths of younger players and, mediocre dudes.
Yeah, man. And I think...
Is that valid? Is that a...
It's been
Did I
written
miss
about.
anything there? Did that sound
Yeah.
like a reasonable presentation of
You're
this?
not even inferring because there's been chatter and people writing about a lot of mid-level players who don't make max money, griping about the system that Chris Paul put into place, which is super maxes and all this value going to 3 players on under one cap. And this is the danger of having a superstar representing the community as a whole, because his lens is from me and LeBron kind of keep these cities afloat and keep these real estate deals with these arenas afloat, and a middle man, sort of I don't know, pick your average middle player, doesn't do that. So you need us. So therefore we can negotiate the terms where we become as valuable as we think we are. The irony with time, this is turning into a dark pod, but time lurches on, and Chris Paul turns out might end his career in purgatory because his contract is really hard to move, as Sam Presti is finding out. He just has no takers for it.
One issue, though, is that we know the NBA superstars are underpaid.
Oh, everyone's underpaid.
They all are, but
Yeah.
the NBA superstars are particularly underpaid.
Yeah, 538 has written about this. LeBron is worth billions.
So in attempting to give more money to the guys who are being shortchanged by max contracts and trying to help that situation, because we know this. We know that superstars have an artificial ceiling, that if there was open bidding on a LeBron or Durant, et cetera, they would make so much more money.
That's what we want, right?
I mean, sure, it's fair.
yeah.
But because they're artificially capped, which means that Kawhi Leonard makes the same amount of money as DeMar DeRozan,
The god,
DeMar
DDR.
DeRozan. But so you have guys who are unequal in talent and impact on winning games, making the exact same money, which puts
With timing is weird,
Which
yeah.
puts the team paying a worse player the same amount of money in a real hole. You got to change that. But the average NBA players like, I don't care. I'm not here because I think LeBron James should be making the $1 billion that he's worth. He's like, I just want more money.
Yeah, I agree. And like, it's really tough because like the premise of the cap is sound. I think that it's a good idea on paper, but it quickly dissolves when you start doing the math and you look at personnel. Personnel is everything. So like we're in an era of such player empowerment where we can talk about these things, but it's LeBron James and he still has that voice. When he eventually retires in 5 years, I don't know what shape this is going to take. Hopefully, Silver seems like, I think he's player friendly, so we're going to figure this out. But yeah, I mean, these minimum contracts should be worth more money. But, to Superstar's credit, it's like a top-heavy product. And even Paul George doesn't put people in seats.
It's a top-heavy product, both in terms of who are the legitimate icons of the league, but also who has an outsized influence on winning games and in turn winning championships. And we've seen it's LeBron James. He went to the finals every single year.
It's Kevin Durant.
It's Durant. It's Steph Curry. It's a handful of superstars who win titles, whose teams go
Ben
the furthest.
Simmons has won.
One title for him, none for Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard, etc. Blah, blah, blah. At the same time, like if you are building a team, you know you know that this is how it works. So you are loath to pay someone who's not a superstar money. So if you've paid Otto Porter like a superstar and he's not, you're like, get him off the team. Let's just trade him to someone else. And another team's like, we don't really have any good players that we're paying, so we'll take that. But this is just how it works now. It's almost fantasy basketball stars and scrubs. The Clippers could have re-signed Tobias Harris for max, and they're like, no, we don't want to do that. He's not our star.
Yeah.
He can go be your star, but he's not our guy. And now we just sort of have a situation where everyone's content to say, let's try to get a couple stars, and then we'll fill in the gaps. We'll fill in the gaps. We'll go find a Justin Holiday and a Kyle O'Quinn and a Rondo, whatever. And it really is the same way as if you're in your fantasy draft and you blow. I mean, it works the same way. It's like a salary cap. You blow 2 or 3 spots on guys who make a lot of money, and then you just pick through the scrap heap.
And sometimes it works. It's all contingent on health, right? Like I always look at Steph Curry and like this season is going to depend on how healthy he is. If he's healthy, if he plays like 85 games, they're going to make the playoffs. I mean, 85, my bad. Like 70 games. If he gets hurt and only plays like 55, they're cooked. They're back into the lottery. But
the big thing here, though, is, sorry just to interrupt that, is that the players who are on the scrap heap don't like being on the scrap heap.
yeah,
That's the complaint about Chris Paul is like, I'm on the scrap heap, not into that.
yeah,
Like you're in your feelings and you're worried about money. That's a toxic combination for resentment.
which is the cliche, right? The aging star is the hardest thing to navigate as a owner or GM or coach. And the Chris Paul thing in a vacuum is interesting because that contract is so immovable, and Morey paid a lot for Westbrook. He gave them Presti picks. And then Presti figures he could just flip them again, but it turns out he's stuck with the bag. Like he's the car has pulled away from the bank and he's holding a bag of money and the cops are
Chris
coming.
Paul dye bag.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like Chris Paul is still a very good player, and he can help all these teams, but now he's found himself in purgatory, and so have the Thunder.
Well, it's also it's the dye pack that's going to go off.
Yeah.
It's like right now you're like, there's money in that bag.
Yeah, the cops aren't here yet.
Like you're holding a sack.
I'm not yet in jail.
bag.
Yeah.
There is money there.
I'm a millionaire right now,
But that dye pack is going to go off.
and the cops are going to come and put me in jail.
How good is an OKC team with Chris Paul, Gallo, Schroeder,
And
SGA, and
SGA.
the God Nerlens? They're
Not terrible.
They're not a tanking team with that.
not terrible. Absolutely. Gilgeous Alexander is probably going to get better. Who knows? Tatum got worse, so hopefully he'll get better. But
And Steven Adams, they have a few guys there that if they don't trade them,
Gallo's good, man.
yeah. I mean, I assume they'll try to trade Gallo or Steven Adams. Maybe
Would you
not.
play
I don't
Chris
know.
Paul at all? Do you just put him on ice, being like, "Oh, he has tendonitis indefinitely"? Like, there's no reason to play him because if teams want him, they want him healthy.
True. I also do think there's some. I think it's worth investing in those guys and giving them enough playing time to justify teams trading for them.
Yeah, you want to trade Gallo. You want to trade everyone except Alexander, right?
That's what I would do.
Yeah.
But I also think that team is like challenging for an 8th seed, which is
Yeah.
not the worst place to be if you have everybody's picks in the future.
Yeah, totally.
If you're not like, well, we're tanking, like, hey, let's just be good and maybe we can rebuild and flip some of these picks or trade create a little optionality in hinky vernacular. It's normally bad to be on the fringes of the lottery, but if you're OKC and you have a bunch of picks from the Clippers and you have a bunch of picks from the Rockets, like, I don't know if you want to necessarily just clear it out and be the worst team in the NBA. You might want to see what emerges.
Yeah, and like, I wanted to ask you this because there was a rumor that Riley was interested in Chris Paul, but he wanted his picks back from Oklahoma City, and they didn't want to give him back. And we know, like, not getting into what the Sixers did, like, second round picks gets you stuff. Like, it's just cash in your pocket. Even late first rounds, mid first rounds, picks you have no intention of using, but you want to flip for value. And that has been a thing for like the last 5 years. Maybe Hinkie kind of brought that up to the surface. When are we going to find out that these picks don't end up having real value? Like, we're going to look at all these moving picks and look at what it's netted. And there's going to be a point where it's just like, I no longer care about second round picks. Or will that happen, do you think?
I personally, I get what you mean in terms of they are these sort of malleable things that swirl around, and like, when do they actually become a player? And they're kind of just, if a first round pick is $1, these are just these nickels that people kind of flip around and amass and then quickly slough them off. At the same time, if you look at the finals, it's a pretty convincing argument that second round picks, if you invest in them and use a bunch, it's free money.
Okay, so
Marc Gasol, Danny Green, Van Vliet wasn't even drafted. Siakam was a super late pick. There's in the first round.
but the first two players you're talking about weren't on their original teams. Like,
Oh,
they
I
were
know,
acquired
I know,
later.
I know. I agree. But like Chris Middleton, Draymond Green, a whole host of dudes on Golden State that weren't good but were playing, Jerebko and maxed out Jordan Bell.
But aren't we just
A few
doing?
others on both teams.
Isn't that just like confirming your idea? Because every year there's 30, and those are like the best of the best. Like, Draymond Green is famous for being a second round pick. Jeremy Lin is famous for being undrafted. But those are like unique. Like, there's so many like Taco Falls and like
Sure,
people who
sure.
don't end up in the league.
But
like
I also think that
Travis Ware.
I think the other point, though, is that if you hit on one, it's just astronomical what it does to your franchise.
And that's my question, because the probability is probably like hilariously
It's low. But you could make an argument that the best defensive and offensive player this postseason were both second-round picks, which is crazy. Jokic and Draymond.
Yeah, for sure. But that's such a small vacuum, right? Like, I think in a broader picture, you might be like, you have to look at the field always and see what's available to you there. But at that point, it's already too late, because it's too late for you to flip that pick. You have to make a decision about what player you want to take. I see a future where people don't value these things as much as they did. I think it's going to transform a little bit.
I don't know. I feel like there's still a huge population of NBA fans who are rigidly stuck in the idea that second-rounders are trash. And it's like a old school traditionalist approach where it's like, second rounders, ha ha ha.
But they might
that's
have a point.
garbage.
But that's my.
But they're always wrong, though. They are, though. They're the people who are always wrong.
Well, the clock the broken clock thing. I love that idea. It's like eventually it's going to be 4:15 twice a day, but I wonder, and that's our job, right? To be like, the people we don't really align with, maybe they're right sometimes. And like, I look at these picks sometimes and the unwillingness of like Sam Presti to let go of some of these late picks. I'm like, maybe you should let go of them, man.
Look.
If they're collateral, use them as collateral.
I would say there's like, maybe in the second round you get 3 to 6 guys who become over the spectrum of maybe one becomes a star, maybe I'm saying maybe, but like 2 become useful. Like Brogdon, that was a huge hit for Milwaukee. Enormous. The fact that they got a dude who gave them on the open market $20 million worth of value for a second round pick was transformational. And that's all I'm saying. It's like, if you can just say, hey, every year we're going to amass as many of these as possible, and we're going to try to get a couple guys, and we're just going to try to get that one. And if you hit, maybe you never do. But if you hit and you get a Jeremy Grant, or you get...
But that's how the casinos make money. That's why people are just like, hey, if I hit, I'm going to be rich. And casinos like, okay, one of you will. We're going to lose money on one of you, but 99 of you won't.
But that's also saying that the NBA drafting is a total crapshoot and not something of a science due to scouting.
No, but you can break each pick down into probability of like value, and like having the number 3 pick is much different than having the number 4 pick, and you just go down the line like that. And it kind of gets tighter at the bottom because you get to a different
But that's
pool.
averaging it overall. So you're taking teams that make poor decisions and good ones, and you're averaging them out.
And
I'm very permissive of teams that bungle draft picks. Like, it happens.
Right.
People make bad decisions all the time. But I do think if you looked at teams who are fairly good at drafting, especially later in the second round, you take a team like the Spurs, they had no trouble finding starters late in the first round pick. In the first round, out of first round picks that were like 27, 28, 29.
Maybe I kind of want to pull away from like players specifically and just talk about like value in terms of a trading piece. And like maybe I do want to talk about Chris Paul and how like this is the hang up with him moving to a team that wants him. Like one of the few teams that are willing to pay the money for him for his remaining contract. And the hang up are these picks. And I'm just like, it got me thinking that like at some point you have to spend them. If they are if they're currency, then you have to spend it on Chris Paul.
Well, it's that same way with the Lakers. Like, they clearly overpaid. They were raked over the coals. They got abused, and they ended up with Anthony Davis. You're like, I mean, the worst case scenario here is that you ended up with Anthony Davis
for a year,
and you right, but like, you got what you wanted out of it. And he might say, "I'm going to the Knicks," but you got Anthony Davis for a year with that gamble. Okay, all right.
You had to do that trade. You had to do that trade. It was the objective.
Given up what they did, etc. I probably would not have even done that trade. But we're saying in this ecosystem,
they wanted Anthony Davis.
If you want the guy and you're willing to pay for it and sacrifice your future, I mean, those are the rules.
Yeah, and I agree. And I guess I'm just wondering, like, when there's going to be a value shift, because I guess we're all thinking like Hinkie now, like as a NBA collective thing. It's like, ooh, those picks are valuable.
I know where you're going with this. I'm familiar with your way of thinking here.
Yeah.
You're being ahead of the curve on saying, do we overvalue these things?
I'm wondering. I don't think I'm right.
No, it's a totally valid idea. But in terms of what people who are around the NBA are saying, and sort of from a value element, we might still be undervaluing them.
That's true too.
Like, that's because that's a vestigial remnant of a time when people just didn't give a shit about first round picks. It's very wild when you go back and look at.
Oh, I'm a Knicks fan.
The way that the Knicks they just didn't get first round picks for half a decade. Like, nope, no picks for us.
It's never going to be 2016. 2016 will never get here.
But like they would just go years and years without having a first round pick.
Bargnani, here's 2 of them.
They would trade it away, then it would like trade it on draft day. I mean, I'm being hyperbolic, but still, there was many teams did that. Like, well, no, we just trade them all.
Yeah.
And I'm saying you're talking about a correction to the correction. We may not have corrected the initial valuation yet.
I'm assuming we have.
And my thing is that the talent idea is correct, but it's the econometric investment that makes them so valuable. Because if I fuck
that's
up,
what I'm questioning, right?
But I'm saying that's where I disagree. Because if you miss on a first round pick, it really depends on where you missed, right? Because if you miss on Markelle Fultz, you're paying him $10 million a year. If you miss on a late first rounder or a mid first rounder, even a miss only costs you a couple million a year. If you miss on signing Bobby Portis to a 3-year deal, you're $45 million in the hole.
Easy there, man.
But
that's Bobby
why
Portis.
I think they're still undervalued.
Sure.
Because you're getting a cheap player for 4 years, and then you're getting, of course, that mini max that like Simmons and Jamal Murray just signed. You're not being like, all right, we're going to back the Brinks truck up, and we're going to spend all this money for Tobias Harris, and he ends up being like solid. He's a good player. Mm-hmm. And you're paying him $35 million a year. You might just draft someone who's better than him tomorrow, and you're paying that guy $4 million a year.
Maybe in the best case scenario.
Right, but
like, that's where Brogdon has value, where he doesn't have value anymore now.
Exactly.
He's still good, but
I'm saying that's the appeal, and that's why they're underrated, because it's not only do you get the player, and you don't have to win him on the free agent marketplace or give up assets to get him. Like, I'm not saying
I get that. Yeah, I get that. I'm just wondering out loud. I'll be thinking about this forever.
I mean, at some point, maybe it'll happen. But the boomers are still running things.
Boomers going boom.
Jordan, be safe out there. I just got notification that he's on a jet ski with a Mai Tai in each hand, and the cord from the bike in front of him or whatever, motorcycle, is clenched between his teeth.
Don Nelson at the helm, smoking that stogie.
Cookies.
Cookies.